Today, I'm going to show you how to build your very own PicoBoy from the parts to the case to the software. Let's get into it. Before you begin, make sure that you have all the parts. You can check how much of each part you need in the build guide. First, remove your diodes from their protective casing. Be careful, because they tend to fly all over the place. Next, pre-tin the upper pad on the PicoBoy PCB. When aligning the diodes, make sure that the line on the diode aligns with the line on the PCB or the diode won't work correctly. The diodes are very hard to handle by hand, so I recommend using tweezers to align them. Now solder the top leg of the diode to the pad that we just pre-tinned. The alignment doesn't have to be perfect, as we'll fix that in the next step. Now that the diode is securely attached to the PCB, align it by holding the tip of the iron on the pad you just soldered, and use tweezers to adjust the diode so that both legs are on their own separate pads. After that, solder the bottom leg of the diode. After soldering all of your diodes, check their connections. Even if the connection isn't perfect, you should still have a working sound system. Once you're finished, your board should look like this. Now it's time to solder the speakers. First, place the speaker in its socket. Make sure that the plus on the speaker aligns with the plus on the PCB or the speaker won't work. Now, flip the board over. The speaker doesn't have to sit flush with the PCB quite yet. First, we are going to solder one leg of the speaker. Now that the speaker leg has a connection, heat the joint and make it so that the speaker sits flush with the PCB. Now solder the second leg of the speaker to the board. Now repeat these steps for the second speaker. Now that you're done soldering, use wire trimmers to trim off the excess leads of both speakers. When you're finished, your board should look like this. Feel free to remove the protective coverings on both speakers. Now you will solder the Pico. Align your Pico on the PCB. I recommend using a piece of tape to hold it in position, as if the Pico is not aligned, your PicoBoy will not function correctly. I recommend resting your PCB on something stable so that it doesn't wiggle around while you're soldering. Start by soldering the 4 pins in the bottom right-hand corner of the Pico. Solder the 4 pins in each of the other 3 corners of the Pico to secure it in place. A good method is to apply solder to the top of the pad on the Pico, then heat it up and drag it down to the pad on the PCB. This allows you to securely attach each of the pins of the Pico. It is very difficult to fix the alignment of the Pico once soldered down, so be completely sure that it is perfectly aligned. After securing the corners of the Pico, you can begin soldering the rest of its pins. It doesn't matter which order you do them in, just make sure that they're all soldered down with a good connection. When you're done, your board should look like this. Now it's time to solder the power diode. Place the power diode in its socket on the PCB. Make sure that the line on the diode aligns with the line on the PCB or your PicoBoy will not boot. Now, flipping the PCB over, solder both legs of the diode. Once you're finished soldering, you can use wire trimmers to trim off the excess leads of the diode. Now it's time to solder the switches. Secure both switches down with a piece of tape, making sure that they are flush with the board. Be completely sure that your switches are on the back of the PCB, otherwise your PicoBoy will not fit into its 3D printed case. Now, flip the board over. Make sure your switches are still flush with the PCB. Now, solder the outer legs of both switches. Make sure that they have a strong connection to the board, as they are what hold the switch in place. Now solder the inner connections of the switches to the board. Make sure there are no bridges in between the pins, or the switches will not function correctly. Now remove the tape from the switches. When you're done, this is how your board should look. Now, you will solder on the battery holders. Insert both battery holders into their designated slots on the PCB. The battery holders are inverted, where one has a plus on the right, the other has a plus on the left. Make absolutely sure that the pluses on both battery holders align with the pluses in their respective sockets. If you don't, your PicoBoy will not work. Flipping the board over, solder all 4 connections for your battery holders. Make sure that they are strong, as they are what hold the battery holders to the PCB. Before applying solder, I recommend heating up each leg and pad to ensure a nice strong connection. Do this for all 4 connections. Now, using wire trimmers, trim off the excess leg of each battery terminal. After you're finished, your board should look like this. Now, on to soldering the buttons. Make sure your PicoBoy PCB is secure for this step. I recommend resting on a roll of tape or using some helping hands to make sure that it is absolutely secure. You do not want it moving around. To solder a button, first apply solder to the top right pad of the button footprint. Next, heat up the solder you just applied and align a button in the footprint. Make sure that each leg of the button is aligned with the pad. Here, I'm adjusting the alignment of the button, making sure that each pad is aligned. Once the button is secured to the PCB, solder the pad opposite the one you just soldered. Then, go between each pad until all of them are connected. For the buttons, I recommend using more solder than usual to ensure a nice strong connection to the board. Now, repeat these steps for all 9 buttons. It doesn't matter what order you solder the buttons in, but I found the order I use here to be the easiest. Once you're finished, your board should look like this. Now, you will secure the screen and solder it in place. Start by lowering the retaining bracket on the header pins by just a little bit so that they barely stick out the bottom of the PCB. Next, seat the header pins with the short end in the PCB and place the screen on top, making sure that the header pins just barely stick out of the holes on the screen. Now, to make sure that the screen is aligned, you will screw it into place using these 4 button screws. Aligning the standouts of the screen with the holes in the PCB, screw the screen into place. Now, solder the header pins on the screen. Each joint on the screen should be a ball of solder. Make sure each connection is well heated to ensure a functional screen. Now, flipping the board over, solder the header to the bottom of the PCB. The joints should look just like the ones on the screen. When you're done, your board should look like this. Don't forget to peel off the screen protector. Now, it's time to move on to the assembly of the shell. Make sure you have all the parts here. Start by placing the boot cell button in the back half of the shell. After that, slide the switch covers onto the switches of your PicoBoy. Then, place your PicoBoy PCB into the back half of the shell. Make sure the switch covers stay inside of the shell and can click easily. Now, place all the buttons into their spots in the front half of the shell. Grab your PicoBoy in its back shell, flip it over, being sure that everything stays together, and place it on top of the front shell. After that, using the 4 20mm screws provided in the kit, screw both halves of the shell together. The screws should automatically bite into the plastic, so don't over-tighten them or you'll crack the shell. Now that you're done assembling your shell, put 2 AAA batteries into the back of your PicoBoy. After that, click the battery cover in place over top of the batteries. And you're all finished! If your PicoBoy isn't already on, you can flip the on switch on the bottom to turn it on. You should see a black screen. We'll fix that in the next steps. Now it's time to flash your PicoBoy's firmware and operating system. Holding down the boot cell button on the back, plug your PicoBoy into your computer. Make sure you are using a USB cable that can transfer data. If you aren't, you will be unable to communicate with your PicoBoy. Now, onto the computer. On your computer, you should see a drive appear. Drag PicoBoy firmware V1.uf2 onto the drive. It should automatically eject itself and reconnect as a USB device. The link to the files that you need are down in the description. After that, extract PicoBoy Communication Software from the zip file it is contained in. Now, run PicoBoy Communication Software.exe. When you run the program, Windows will flag it as a virus. It does this because I have not yet gotten a security key to sign it with. Click More Info, then Run anyway. Once you have PicoBoy Communication Software running, click System, then select Port. If your PicoBoy doesn't show up, click Refresh Ports. Click Connect, and the software will connect to your PicoBoy. When you do, you'll receive an error. We will fix this now by formatting your PicoBoy. Press the Format Console button. When you do, a notification will appear. Click OK, and it will automatically begin formatting your PicoBoy with PBOS. Once you're finished formatting your PicoBoy, you may need to update its operating system depending on your version of software. You can check this by looking at your system version in the software and the latest version in the link in the description. If you need to update your console, click Update Console and you'll be shown a notification. Click OK, then choose the latest version's update file. Your PicoBoy should begin updating automatically. Once your console is finished updating, that's it! Your PicoBoy is ready to use. Click Disconnect to disconnect your PicoBoy from your computer. Now unplug your PicoBoy from your computer. All that's left is to complete your PicoBoy's first time setup. Turn on your PicoBoy and you'll be greeted with a screen asking you to choose a language. Choose your language and press A to continue. After that, you'll be asked to test your buttons. Make sure every button clicks and is registered by your PicoBoy. Then, you'll be asked to test your PicoBoy's sound system. Make sure the switch on the top right of your PicoBoy is switched to the right. Each of the 4 diodes you soldered will be tested in this step. When you hear sound coming from your PicoBoy, press the A button. Next up, you will customize your PicoBoy. You can choose a background color, adjust the screen brightness, and the volume of the speakers. All of these can be changed in the future in system settings. Once you're done, press the home button to continue into PBOS. your PicoBoy will automatically reboot. That's it! You successfully built, flashed, formatted, and set up your very own PicoBoy. You can look at the user guide to learn more about adding games and customizing your PicoBoy further. Enjoy!